Hello and welcome to the Godscast at Graphic Policy Radio. I'm Stephen Attewell.
And I'm Chris Holcomb.
And we are starting this week with issue 9, which is, I believe, the first to have Anake's face on the cover. Although she doesn't immediately show up. We start with Laura's parents worrying about the kids.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny, like, you know, not as someone who doesn't like follow celebrities super close, especially not like celebrity TV shows, like reality TV shows, you know, the experience of like knowing that your kid's going to be home because you see them on the television, that's kind of funny.
Okay, I can see the humor in that. They seem so bland to me. I don't have a whole lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're supposed to be kind of what normal parents are, because we then flash like the kind of turn over the page, right? Is they're worried that like is someone looking out for them when we cut to like Anake in a very motherly mode,
right?
Comforting Minerva.
Now, forgive me. We've actually taken a few weeks off between recordings. What is Minerva crying about? Do I know this?
So it's not entirely made clear, like or not made clear. It's not like verbally spelled out quite so much. But if you go to like the next full page, where she is, where Baphomet shows up and says, "What's wrong with Shirley Temple?"
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "We're all going to die." And then
yeah, I couldn't tell if that was a reaction. Like, I'm not sure if she killed that ex-Valkyrie at the convention or not. And yeah, so I didn't know if there's something immediately that we had read many weeks ago that's sparked this kind of thing. So yeah, it's just existential dread then.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the sort of thing like, you know, obviously the show is the comic is doing a bit of foreshortening, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of the sort of whole idea of mortality, that, you know, young people think they're immortal, but they're not. And here it's like, okay, but, you know, you're going to die in 2 years. And it's like kids always think that they're immortal. And like, it's a major event as a kid to like suddenly have an understanding of death. And I remember like when I was young, it was, it was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells.
Mm-hmm.
Where like I think my parents were reading it to me, and they got to the part where like he goes super far in the future, like beyond the Morlocks and Eloys, and like there's these giant crabs and like the sun is going out, and like that made me realize not only that I was going to die, but that like the universe was going to die. And like I had my little freak out about it, and then, you know, eventually I got over it. But like this is, you know, way more intense.
Yeah, it's a lot closer. When you're that age, time lasts a lot longer. I think my freshman year of high school felt like about 10 years. But I don't know, understanding that you will never be 30 is something I could see a teenager not giving a shit about. You will never be 16. That's very different.
Yeah. So what did you think about like Baphomet showing up and asking questions?
I think I don't care about him. Like he's just got such a fuckboy vibe to him.
Yeah, that kind of sums him up perfectly. He is a fuckboy.
He's just not interesting, and I know there has to be the least interesting member of every Pantheon, but does he have to be this obnoxious?
Yeah. So the interesting thing to me is like he's also kind of fucked up about the same thing, in part because like getting shot was like for him this brush of mortality that I think like he bought into the superhero side of it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And then Anake tells him the truth about the Prometheus Gambit. What did you think of this?
This is, I want to step back because I'm still kind of reeling from the revelation that they are not immortal, at least until their 2 years are up. So I went back and thought, and I didn't want to go back and read again because I thought I might get confused. But So they have, in order to be bulletproof, they have to be ready for them. Is that what I'm understanding?
Sort of. Like, I mean, we definitely saw with when Lucifer got killed, right? That,
Mm-hmm.
if you just get the drop on them and they don't have time to, like, gin up their powers, that they can be killed.
But that was Ananke. I assume she had
Oh,
a master key, as
okay,
it
fair
were.
enough. Fair enough. That was my sort of rationalizing, what with the whole 1, 2, 3, 4 thing.
Yeah, but that makes more sense now because she did sneak up on her.
Yeah, she just sort of like popped her from the side, basically. Um, the the other thing that's interesting, and this is, I think, kind of a really metatextual thing, is this idea that performing makes you vulnerable.
Yeah, I can
Um,
see that.
which,
It's
like,
like an Independence Day when they're only you can only blow up the ship when they're about to fire.
yeah, but it's also like it's about art, right, and performance. That, like, part of performance is opening yourself up to the world, and that makes you vulnerable. Um, as we will see in an upcoming issue that really gets at the sort of the show business side of this. Um, but then we get this idea that, like, hey, remember this Prometheus Gambit that we said is bullshit? It's not actually such bullshit.
Yeah, it works in a different direction now.
Yeah, that gods can take life from one another. That, like, there's a limited pool of god life. Um,
Yeah,
so here's a quote. Why do you think she told him?
because she's terrible and she likes to start shit.
Mm,
Like I told you, I do not trust her. And if there's one person in this pantheon I do not trust with that information, it's Baphomet because he's a little attention whore. And yeah, so
yeah, and it is interesting that, like, he's kind of instantly suspicious about this. He says, like,
mhm.
wait a second, wait a second. Like, you killed her. You just said you'd killed me. Like, something's fucked up here. And what's really interesting is the way that Ananke responds is, I gave up my godhood for you, which is something that we hadn't known before. We learned a lot about Ananke in this issue.
We do, but I don't know if I can really trust what she's saying.
Yeah.
In that, it's starting to make me wonder: is she's throwing out um, this Prometheus gambit that works within the pantheon?
Yeah.
So now I'm wondering, like, our first opening scene was 4 gods left of 12 who are all inside a house as it blows up.
Yeah.
Is she doing her own Prometheus gambit? Does she resurrect the 12
Ah.
and harvest them for their time? Is it more efficient if she gets them to kill each other and kind of is it easier on her? So
That's a very good question.
I've had enough with Ananke.
Yeah.
So
Especially when, we see, like, okay, so Cassandra shows up, and I kind of love her interactions with Baphomet because they are both, in their own way, kind of abrasive personalities.
yeah, the word mansplaining is a little bit offensive here, but it's the two of them butting heads just feels like I don't know. I love Cassandra as a
Oh yeah.
character. I would hate her as a person.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the like vibe that we're supposed to get, is that she is,
Mm-hmm.
like, very witty, but that must be kind of obnoxious to deal with in person because, like, she always needs to get the last word. Um,
She needs to feel like she's more of an expert than everyone else in the room.
yeah. And she's a
And this,
she's a bit
and
of a shit
I
stir
lost a,
too.
yeah, I lost a lot of respect for her though
Oh yeah?
in this couple panels when she says there's never been a Baphomet.
Yes. That's interesting.
You don't know that.
Yeah.
You don't know exactly. So she's talking out of her ass and convincing herself she's more
Yeah.
knowledgeable than
Well,
she
I mean,
is.
I think this is like grad student arrogance. Like, I've done all, because remember, she's got a master's in religion, in no, not religious studies. It was Pantheon studies. So, like,
Right.
she's like, "Oh, I've done all the reading. I know more." It's the Goodwill Hunting scene in the bar with the
I guess
with the Harvard students.
I haven't seen Goodwill Hunting, but what came to mind was November 2016.
Oh
People
yeah.
like you and me. So
So we then get the like interview with Anake, and like I remember reading this for the first time, and this like blew my damn mind in a bunch of different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So, first of all, I kind of love like she's a really good foil for Cassandra because she just has ways of like
Mm-hmm.
cutting completely against her bullshit. My favorite line is the
Right.
like, you know, prove that you're immortal, and she says like, okay, we can pause for 100 years. It's like, yeah,
That was some Oleana Tyrell level
yeah,
shit.
yeah. That's a very good like. God, if Diana Rigg, you know, if they decide to make this into a TV show, please Diana Rigg for Anake. And what I also like is like the way that she talks about history. You know, as a historian, like I'm always fascinated by the way that we think of the past and the way that we sort of try to place ourselves in the past. And the thing where she's sort of saying like, you know, look, there is like history with a capital H, right? That people think about. Like no one ever thinks that they're, you know, in their past life they were a peasant, right? It's always like a princess or a pharaoh or something like that. You know, it's always someone important. And she's like, well, you know, there's like capital H history, and then there's like this, you know, kind of invisible history.
Right.
So, what did you think of like the story that she tells of how the Pantheon came about?
Honestly, it's because I don't trust her at all. It reminded me of all things of Wreck-It Ralph.
Huh. Okay.
Where he's I forget his name.
Oh.
The king tells this story about how if the glitch is shown, they'll unplug the machine and all my people will be homeless and she will die.
King Candy.
It's a very King Candy. He tells this story. It's very convincing and it makes you empathize with what's going on here, but I don't trust her, and so I feel like it's self-serving on her part. Whatever darkness is being kept at bay, maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but she's getting them to perform actions that serve her own
it's interesting
here, and I'm not sure they line up with ours.
It's very much a narrative of progress and sacrifice, right? That she says, you know, look, back in the day, you know, the gods walked the earth, but then we got beaten back in the darkness, and then we figured out this ritual to let us win. And like the image that we see, I mean, I don't know how you interpret the sort of Stonehenge little scene there, but it looks like a human sacrifice to me.
I did not see that. I saw that as someone being brought forth.
Fair enough. But it's also this thing where she says, like, we could have had men on Mars thousands of years before the rise of Rome, but for the Great Dark, which is like this really interesting sentiment. It reminds me a lot of the Pax Romana comic. Pax Romana comic by Hickman. Yeah, which is the premise of that comic is that the Vatican sends mercenaries from the present day back into the past in ancient Rome to like change history. Yeah,
to change history.
So to like, you know, make sure that Rome never falls. And
what is it? Delessum est.
Delinda.
Something est.
Yes.
There was.
Yeah.
Delinda est. That's it.
So anyway, it sort of like reminded me a little bit of that like idea that, you know, that, you know, progress has been impeded, and if only we could sort of prevent, you know, the sort of the dark ages, that would be so much ahead of where we are.
It got a little more ethereal for me in that I'm bringing this up again. I don't know if you've seen Carnival. It was an amazing show. In the lore, it's that there's a prophet, and there's a dark prophet and a light prophet, and every generation they will fight. One of them will kill the other, and whoever wins, mankind will see either a generation of progress like we will get space travel, or we'll get World War II based on who wins.
That's pretty close,
So
because
it's just,
there's this line where she talks about what is it, that inspiration is what gods are for. That it's not that they like are the, you know, the difference between this and like ancient astronauts. It's not outside forces that are creating everything. It's just they are providing the sort of the catalyst. Anyway, we then get a really interesting thing, which is that she mentions that she had previously told someone about this stuff. And it's Robert Graves who wrote The White Goddess. And I should explain for our listeners that Robert Graves is a very famous poet, writer, classicist. He's responsible for like I, Claudius and stuff like that. And The White Goddess was a book that he wrote, which is sort of one of these kind of like syncretic monomyth kind of theories. It's very similar to one of his mentors was James George Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough. And it's like this argument that, you know, Graves was arguing that there's like this white goddess of birth, love, and death, that like all goddesses are part of, which is kind of interesting. And then we get this really interesting moment where Anake turns it around on Cassandra. And she says, "You're good at being critical, but you're not exactly a good critic." And she says, "It is a poor critic who says that a lack of effect on them implies all others are insincere in their love." What do you think about that moment? Because like that's a really interesting.
I feel a little called out in that my criticisms of Buffy the Vampire Slayer over the past couple of years. So it seems to hit home for me.
You know, it is a kind of, I think, like a little bit of a meta commentary on criticism, like similar to what's his name, Anton Ego from Ratatouille. But like here, it's less about you know, oh, all criticism is bad or all criticism is good. It's just sort of saying, you know, look, you can't denigrate other people's emotional reactions. Like that's an unfair baseline, because it means you're putting yourself on a level of, you know, emotional importance more than everyone else, which is kind of shitty.
Well, it felt like you also have to be constructive, and that's not something Cassandra is good at.
And then, like, wham bang, all of a sudden Cassandra is a god. Yes, she is a triune goddess. She is one of the Norns. Specifically, she is Urder.
Okay, I have no clue who the Norns are.
They are exactly similar to the Fates. I guess you're not a fan of the anime or manga Oh My Goddess? Okay.
Unfortunately, no. I've only had a couple animes in my life.
So the Norns are pretty much the same thing as the Fates. Like it's one woman who spins the thread of fate, one woman who measures it, one woman who cuts it. It's a metaphor for birth, life, and death. I really like her outfit. It's very simple, but it's very cool.
Yeah, I like it too. It's it leans into the androgyny, which is super important for I was actually having this discussion with Miles Schneiderman. If those of you have heard of him, he's at the Smash Fiction podcast. We talked a little bit about casting the TV show of this, and something that I find it was just, a little stunt casting, and all we came up with was Aubrey Plaza as Woden. But something super important. I don't know any Japanese trans women actresses. However, it's something that is super important to me about Cassandra's character is that the fact that she is trans is absolutely no big thing. Like, nobody throws any slurs, nobody comments on it. It's just another thing in the world. So I would really like to see this be played by a trans woman who does not have as much passing privilege as a lot of the trans actresses we see out there. And that's why I really like this costume, is it leans really hard into
it's very noticeable. Like on the page where and this is something else that we should talk about, where she transforms her assistants into gods, which, like, that's something that we'd been debating earlier on. And like, can you make an ordinary person? Can a god make a god? Like, they're both wearing floor level dresses,
right?
And she's not. Like, that's a really great marker.
Yeah, I'm wondering if she has any choice, though.
Does
she have to?
It's kind of interesting because she sort of says, okay, so I'm the Norn, right? And it's almost phrased like a question because Anake says correct, and then she says, which makes them Verdandi and Skald. And all of a sudden there's like this lightning effect, which seems to be like coming down from above and then spreading from her to them. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know whether she's choosing them or whether it's just they were there or what.
Or were they manipulated into being there? Because I'm remembering that Beth,
she got fired,
got herself in trouble, which means one of these two has replaced Beth. Has there been some pushing behind the scenes to get the right people in place? I don't know.
One of the things I think is really funny, and also kind of interesting about like how much do like the gods get a sense like of their past lives or whatever. Like, she comes out of this saying like it's all still bullshit. Like, it seems like very little personality change. Okay.
I read that differently. Assuming that she was very similar to the Fates kind of sit at a level above the gods, and we saw in Sandman, as well as the Endless. So they kind of have a higher perspective on. So I just felt it was like, yeah, of course the Fates, they literally control everything, and they have power over the gods. They're gonna feel differently about this.
Yeah. So we then go to a really kind of interesting moment where Laura is freaking out. And she arrives home and she's in tears and her parents don't really understand. And, she's not being very coherent about what's going on. I was curious, how did you interpret this moment?
I felt it was predictable, and in retrospect, if this is what she's going to go through, I'm glad she's a teenager. But like, I get that she's super excited and got a false positive at one point, but at the same time, disappointments happen, girl. I mean, you knew going in that that golden ticket was not likely yours, so I'm just kind of like, I'll hug you, but I'm not gonna. Yeah, I knew this was coming.
Yeah.
You were not going to be chosen.
But it is kind of an interesting dot. And I like that the next page is, you are cordially invited to the death of your dreams. But it is kind of interesting that... what was I going to say? That, like, she's been the protagonist, right? From the first issue. Like, if there was going to be any sort of like chosen one, arc here, that it's like the chosen one just got not chosen.
Yeah, I never thought she would, in that having a human perspective is super important for me in figuring out how this world works. putting the protagonist in God's shoes is
it's hard to be the audience POV if you are all of a sudden in a context in which the audience could not possibly follow along. All right, so that wraps up our first episode. I'm going to do a short spoiler section, and then we will get cracking on to the next one. Chris, before you go, do you want to plug your stuff?
See you guys in a minute. Yeah, sure. So you've heard me talk about gods and devils in here. You can I've alluded to my coverage of Buffy the Vampire Slayer at Unspoiled Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and also I recently did one on a Black Mirror episode
that's a good one.
Called San Junipero, my favorite ever. So come check us out at Unspoiled. Oh God, that's
cool.
my favorite hour of television ever.
I will give you a 5 count and then get into the spoilers. 1, 2, 3.
All right.
4,
see y'all later.
5. So this is like an issue that really radically changes when you're up to the present. And I should say, like, I'm gonna spoil the shit out of like where we're up to in WicDiv. So, you know, if you're not like current, you might want to check off. So the first thing that's kind of interesting to me is like the moment where Minerva is crying. I'm not sure now how genuine this is versus performative, because we now know that like she gets reborn with Anake, like in a cycle with Anake, and she very much knows who she is from the beginning. So like this is not a accident, or sorry, like she knows that she's a god from day one. The next thing is, in terms of like the timing of all of this, what I find really interesting in volume 2 is that like Anake's decision making is clearly being forced by events. That like Baphomet shows up, starts asking about questions about Laura. He needs to be shut up. He needs to like we can't have him asking awkward questions. Laura needs to be shut up. She needs to stop asking awkward questions. Cassandra needs to be shut up. She's asking awkward questions. So like we're seeing this kind of pile up of like, okay, turn this person into a god, kill this person, demonize that person. It's kind of interesting to see the conspiracy. The next thing, Anake's like whole story here is pretty much complete bullshit. She is like, we now know that like she has been perverting the course of this whole phenomenon from the very beginning. And it's almost entirely the case that, or entirely likely the case that like the darkness that she's talking about is specifically coming after her. And like, this is her attempt to evade mortality over the millennia. Also that whole kind of progress narrative, like now that we know that like she actively seeks to like retard human progress so that she can live forever. It's like, oh my God, this couldn't be more wrong. Obviously all the white goddess stuff from issue 39 that's one of the rare points in which he's telling the truth. The bit where Laura freaks out because she's not a god, like especially now that like Laura has stopped becoming a god but has powers, and like her thing earlier where she was saying my head's full of plasma, I think that Laura is one of these things above the gods, which is she's a storyteller. And storytellers, you know, when they have ideas in their head that they can't get out, that is an incredibly frustrating phenomenon, speaking from personal experience. So that sort of, I think, explains a lot of her kind of frustration in this phase. And, you know, the kind of inspiration that she got from Lucifer, she is now tapping into, even though she has somehow stopped being Persephone. So that's it. In terms of my stuff to plug, you can find me at Stephen Attewell on Twitter. You can find me at racefortheironthrone.wordpress.com. And I'll see you next episode. Bye.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games. you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.